the hips and the chest. Now the modern standard, Volvo's three-point seatbelt system, patented in 1958, is the single most effective safety device in any vehicle. But even by the 1970s, the most powerful car industry in the world still wasn't listening. And it wasn't just about seatbelts. Despite research, so long as safety features were not selling points, car companies wouldn't install them. And even the public ignored the statistics that revealed that their cars were killers. So advertising focused on style and performance.
Front disc brakes, red line wide oval tires. Want another kind of roof over your head?
Who are you?
Perhaps my optional bucket seats, power steering, air conditioning will identify me.
Aren't you the Dodge Adventurer?
My secret's out. Come on, girl. We've still got time to swing.
Then an unknown Princeton and Harvard Law School graduate called upon the government to regulate the industry. Ralph Nader went on to become an activist lawyer and presidential candidate, opposing the power of large corporations.
The most hazardous car currently in use in significant numbers in the United States.
In 1965, Nader published a controversial book that would prompt a quarter of a century of conflict. His book, Unsafe at Any Speed, claimed that General Motors were producing dangerous vehicles, ignoring research from crash safety scientists.
More likely to cause serious or fatal injury in any collision than virtually any other car in common use in this country.
General Motors hired a team to investigate Nader, who subsequently sued GM for invasion of privacy and received $425,000 in an out-of-court settlement. Then, in 1966, on the basis of research by manufacturers and crash scientists, the US Congress passed America's first auto safety laws. The most substantial automotive safety legislation in America to date. The first changes it made were fundamental improvements like headrests, energy-absorbing steering wheels, and most importantly, the mandatory installation of seatbelts. But one manufacturer was criticized for apparently choosing to put profit before safety. Ford were facing strong competition from Volkswagen and various Japanese companies in the American small car market. It usually takes around 4 years to produce a new car. But Ford took just 2 in bringing the Pinto into production. Before its release, Ford engineers had discovered a major design flaw. In some rear-end crash tests, the Pinto's fuel tank was damaged, which often resulted in an explosion and fire. But the Pinto production line had already been assembled, and Ford released the car. Ford later claimed they'd used an accepted risk-benefit analysis, but were still criticized by some for forging ahead. Finally, in 1978, Ford agreed with the Department of Transportation that it would recall the car. And there were other cars and other designs that were still causing death and injury. As cars got faster and faster, collisions became more dramatic and more deadly. On impact, they could still become horrific death traps. In 1967, one particularly high-profile accident showed just how devastating this could be. In the early hours of the 29th of June, on a stretch of Highway 90 in Louisiana, a Buick carrying Jane Mansfield was en route to New Orleans. Visibility was extremely poor, and at approximately 7 minutes past 4, the Buick slammed into the back of a slow-moving truck. As the top of the car slid under the rear of the truck, the roof tore off, killing all 3 front occupants. Jane Mansfield had suffered terrible, fatal head injuries. The top of her skull sliced off. Mansfield would have had a greater chance of survival in a modern car, because today's car body is engineered as a safety cage, which deflects impacting forces around the car's reinforced structure. The great misunderstanding about car safety had been that the more rigid the vehicle, the safer it was. But decades of human injuries were clearly proving otherwise. And as crash science searched for ways to protect the car, it actually revealed something far more important to passenger survival. It's often true that after impact, the worse a car looks, the better off its occupants. The reason was simple. Objects in motion have energy, and it requires an opposing force to bring a moving object to rest. This can happen quickly, or it can happen slowly. Slowing down the time it takes for the opposing force to absorb that energy is the key to modern crash science. If the front and back end of a car are built to crumple, most of the impact forces are absorbed before they reach the occupants. This area of energy absorption became known as the crumple zone. Critical to survival, but it's not enough on its own.
Your car is designed to crumple on impact. Your face isn't.
Unrestrained, passengers still have a separate physical mass and energy. But seatbelts, though provided, still weren't being worn. In Britain, public safety campaigns began to drive the message home.
The biggest thing I've seen is the increased use of seatbelts over the last 15 to 20 years. If we were to look back 20 years ago, most casualty departments would have patients who would have a nurse stitching up their face all night long because they've head-butted the windscreen because they haven't been wearing a seatbelt. If a patient isn't wearing a seatbelt, is ejected from the vehicle, their chances of having severe or life-threatening injuries are increased by 300%.
But on the other side of the Atlantic, this advice was ignored. By the 1980s, fewer than 25% of the American car-going public were wearing seatbelts. So new state laws and safety campaigns tried to raise public awareness, although the American version was less chilling than the British.
Okay, kids, do it! Do the buckle!
Do it! Do the buckle! Pull it, push it, click it, that's the way seatbelt safety's where it's at. Today, front and back, for safety all around. Pull it, push it, click it, that's the sound.
And the ads were still only a moderate success. So the government decided to take choice out of the equation. And the scientists went back to the drawing board. They needed to develop a device that would restrain occupants in their seats, whether they liked it or not. A safety device over which people had no control. The race was on to develop the airbag, then considered to be the ultimate passive restraint. The airbag had been invented in the 1950s and even appeared in models during the 1970s. But the first airbag restraint system fitted as standard was developed by Chrysler in 1988. It was a radical step in safety. Airbag deployment is extremely violent. To be effective, it needs to inflate in a split second. Scientists explored the use of explosives, like gunpowder. Engineers worked on the size of the bag, what materials to use, and how to open them 30 milliseconds after impact without blowing them apart. All of which proved difficult. Chrysler finally got it right with a thin nylon fabric packed into the steering wheel or dashboard. In a collision, the inflation force is equal to running into a brick wall at up to 25 kilometers an hour. The ignition of a rapid-burning solid